What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we're going to talk about a few different things tonight, followed by our favorite offseason segment. This is, believe it or not, version 4 of Who's Back. So we will get there, but first we have to discuss there's some smoke coming out of the Pac-12. I don't know if it's smoke signals of stuff to come or smoke as in the conference is on fire, maybe both. And then Florida State. What do the Pac-12 and Florida State have in common? We will get there. Daniel, are you excited for Who's Back? I mean, it's one of my favorite, probably my favorite offseason segment. It's ours.
Yeah, it's great. We came up with it. We both talked about how there's several teams who always claim to be back, and the fan bases are like, if we get back, and the national media for some reason is like, if these teams are back, then the sport is better. So we took it upon ourselves to rate their backness. And so I think it's a great metric that we have created for ourselves. And, I think it's fun. These different groups all have their own, I guess, their own aptitude to where they should be, what constitutes them as back. It's to what they aspire to be. You have to have been there to be back. You can't be back to something that's greater than what you've ever done. So, I think it's kind of sizing up and right sizing some expectations for some fan bases. Maybe it's a, cold shower. Maybe it's a wake up call to some. So I'm excited to jump into some of these teams here when we rank them in just a few minutes.
Let's start with some news. So I'm going to connect two different topics, Daniel. So Pac-12 is going to have a new media rights deal by April 1st. Mm-hmm. And Florida State had a board of trustees meeting this past weekend. And Florida State AD just given us some direct quotes, which is awesome because it's no longer, there's been some smoke of, hey, some schools are talking, and we know that there's people that are on the inside that have said, hey, I don't think conference realignment is done. Now, no one knows how this is actually going to pan out, but we can start to see some pieces that might fall or be a part of it. So let's start with the Pac-12. It comes out, a few people reported on this. Dennis Dodd actually has a great article where he pulled some numbers, but it's sounding like, Apple TV Plus seemed like a landing spot for the Pac-12, which first of all, I don't think is great because the Pac-12 games are already hard enough to find. So what's the best thing for the conference? Make them harder to find on a streaming service. Right. So Dennis Dodd laid out a great thing about what, it's the numbers. So viewership wise, I thought this was fascinating, Daniel. In 2021, over the last two seasons, so 2021 and 2022, the most viewed Pac-12 game, all right, that is just between two Pac-12 teams that are not USC and UCLA. So current or future Pac-12 teams was between Oregon and Washington. In 2021, it was 4.8 million viewers, all right? Compare that to the Big Ten this year. What their biggest game was Michigan and Ohio State. Surprise.
It was the game, is what you're telling me?
17 million viewers. 17.1 million. So just to put that in perspective, it's looking like the money the Pac-12 is going to get is going to be about $20 million per school per year, will be the payout, which means a school like Oregon will be about $55 million per year behind in TV money than a school like Rutgers in the Big Ten or Northwestern and the Big Ten, which in a sense, how do you kill a conference? That's how you kill a conference. So this is the first piece of the puzzle of realignment's going to happen because specifically schools like Oregon, Washington cannot do that and think they're going to compete nationally.
Yeah, this is tough. It's like, is this a Star Destroyer or a Planet Destroyer? Like the in Star Wars with I just think that it's so crazy because I don't see a way out for the conference. I see a way out for these individual teams. There's going to be ways to divvy this up. It's just it's going to move kind of all at once. Like you said, we don't exactly know when, but it's tough because the Pac-12 network. It That's one of the problems is Pac-12 networks itself has been difficult to find. One of the things I know, the SEC, for example, you talk about like a broadcast rights contract per year. You're spending, I think it's $17 a year specifically on the SEC network if you're in the footprint. Outside of that, I think it's 30 cents a year. But they did that. The SEC did that so that viewership would be nationwide. Um, that's what you're kind of referencing. There's already people not watching the Pac-12 as is. They have their own constraints with being on the West Coast and much of the East Coast being in bed or moving on with their day or whatever the case may be. So their product not being readily available on, major and especially their flagship network not being available coast to coast on every, you know, cable streaming option out there. This is a problem. So it's tough. It's tough for the biggest schools, like you mentioned, Oregon and Washington. Now that USC and UCLA are leaving, it's tough to like convince them that they need to stay, because I think that they're going to have some sort of assurances to either have unequal distribution of the money where they get more because they're the biggest brands and they'll be catered to. Um, I think that's only a Band-Aid, though. It's always just a Band-Aid. It's like what Texas and Oklahoma were getting with the Big 12 with their uneven shares. They were getting more, but at a certain point, the Big 12 just can't keep giving them more money because there's not enough to go around. And so you see Texas and Oklahoma bolt. I think the same thing will happen to the Pac-12. They may make it last a little longer by switching up the revenue share with, like I said, Oregon and Washington. We'll see, though.
We'll see. So another piece of this puzzle is that Florida State had a board of trustees meeting on Friday, and the athletic director has just some phenomenal quotes coming out of the meeting where it was discussed. I mean, a few things like how much would it cost to get out of the ACC's grant of rights, which is $120 million, which is 3 times the operating budget for like 1 year for Florida State athletics. So it's a lot of money. But here's where the ACC, and most people know this, but if you don't, the ACC has a horrible TV deal. They negotiated in 2016, and this deal runs through 2036.
Right.
Which the Big Ten and SEC will have newer deals than they have now before the current ACC deal runs out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know you're reading the same thing I was. I mean, the athletic director saying, what would you say about the 30 million?
Yeah, they're $30 million. He said, we can't continue to be $30 million behind every single year and be expected to keep pace. And obviously he's referencing Florida, being in the same state with the SEC school that's just raking in way more money per year, specifically on just media rights. Now, I will say that $120, Jacob, $120 million is just to leave the ACC. It does not include the media rights. That is separate. So
Gotcha.
they would have to. So to leave the conference, they pay $120 million. Honestly, if that's all it was, Florida State would be gone tomorrow, because I think that they would be able to afford it. And you talk about the, opportunity cost of passing up on this SEC money, which presumably if they left, they would only leave for either the SEC or the Big Ten. SEC, very much obviously they're in the southeast of the United States, just makes sense. But going to the SEC would make the most sense for them if they were to leave for a bigger conference. But if they paid the $120 million, they still obviously wouldn't have those media rights. So they're not attractive to any conference without media rights. They would still be broadcast on ACC. So that's in and of itself. There is a considerable amount. Now I listened to, so Josh Pate spoke with Chuck Oliver. There's a lot of people in specifically Florida State and Clemson's circle that believe that this deal has enough in it where they could, with the right legal team and the right, prowess on the legal front, could break it down to where it gets, either not necessarily nullified, but where it is not too bad to, escape it. They just want to make sure their footing is set before they do something like that. And you obviously want to, kind of make sure that you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's before you make a move like that. So I think this is part of that vetting process. I think you see the AD kind of pushing at the walls, seeing what he needs to do, kind of rattling the cage a little bit. This also could be a play, Jacob. We talked about the unequal shares. It could be another Band-Aid that the ACC and everybody does for Florida State and Clemson and, everybody like that. I think you could see that start be a thing, but we'll see. I don't know. Florida State is one of the biggest brands, if not the biggest brand, and that includes Clemson in the ACC. And this conference is no longer even a good basketball conference, so it's really struggling right now overall to keep. If they were to get Notre Dame to join, it's still like that's. I think that it's a matter of when, not if, these teams will leave the ACC.
Yeah, and that's where it's like we led with, where there's smoke, there's fire. We don't know exactly how it's going to burn down yet, but it's going to burn down. There's a fire somewhere, and I don't think it's getting put out anytime soon. So it might be a couple years before we see some movement on this, but it started with Texas and Oklahoma 2 years ago at this point, but this by no means has stopped as far as realignment goes and the sport shifting. I thought it was interesting. Florida State makes up 15% of all the viewership of the ACC, and they get the same 7% cut as everyone else. So at least in the short term, if I'm the ACC, I'm trying to keep Clemson and Florida State happy for as long as possible. And do you go to ESPN knowing that, they don't want to pay what the Pac-12 wants them to pay? And do you go to ESPN and try to renegotiate so that they have more games? That's another option.
The issue, I think, is that ESPN could potentially facilitate Florida State and Clemson to the SEC because
they already own all the games.
They already have all of it. So I think that's they could build up one, to basically an untouchable status, especially when you consider that Big Ten is the alternative, and that's on NBC, Fox, and these other places. So it's kind of ESPN's way of, loading up their super team, if you will. So they have their super conference with their super media package, and basically ensuring that if a conference deteriorates, at least they've got the best conference in the land with the best teams and the best, viewership.
Oh, for sure. For sure. All right, Daniel, let's get into our favorite off-season topic. Who's back? So this is version 4 off seasons that we've done this. Here's what we mean. We have picked out 8 teams that met the following criteria: previous national title winner, or fan base that has had even an era of greatness, that has not won, at the time we said, a championship in the last decade. At this point, it's been a championship in the last, I'm making sure, who's my most recent champion here?
2005.
That's what I thought. I'm making sure. 2005. Yeah. So 18 years. These teams have not won a championship. So who's back? We felt like all these teams, the question is always asked around these 8 teams, like, are they back? And of course, I think the first one everyone thinks of is Texas. And yes, we're going to talk about Texas. Is Texas back? And we'll see. Here's the remainder of the 8 teams. We've got Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State, Miami, USC, Tennessee, Texas, and Nebraska. So a little bit of everywhere. This is always fun. So as I go through these teams, Daniel, I'm going to go in order of your order last year. We got to see what's changed here. And I want to first define for each team, I think back means something different. And so I want to talk about what would back mean for this team, which we've talked about before. We'll address it again. And then and kind of mix with that, what are realistic expectations? And then your ranking, where you have them this year in our back ranking. So we're going to rank them 1 to 8 as far as who is most back to least back. And let's go ahead and start. Daniel, number 1 on your list the last 2 years and mine has been Notre Dame. Notre Dame was 1. What does back look like for Notre Dame?
I do think competing on a national level, for both recruits and, in the college football playoff, they obviously fell well short of that this year. Bringing in a new coach, they did drop, for what it's worth. They did drop on my list this year, so I think it's nice because they did improve in recruiting. So I have a good optimistic view of them going forward. Still, it's not anything necessarily about that, but it is about, hey, they didn't have a great year this year. They did transition from coach to coach. I want to see if Marcus Freeman can be the guy long term. Brian Kelly stabilized this program, and he moved on to LSU and already won 10 games his first year. I'm curious if we can get there with Notre Dame again. If this was just a blip, I am a little bit worried optically from the offensive coordinator thing we talked about last week with Ludwig basically getting wined and dined and then not bought out so that he can join the staff. So I'm interested to see how this, coordinator situation goes for Marcus Freeman, if he's going to be able to, sustain and grow and do all these kinds of things. But I mean, recruiting looks there. They're as great of a brand as there's ever been. Just a few years back, they were in the playoff 2020. So, it's still within the past 4 years. I got to think that they are. You may go ahead and give you my number, or you want to go?
Yeah, rank it.
Okay,
Rank it.
I have them number 2. Number 2. So they didn't drop all the way from grace. It's one bad year, but this other team that I've put ahead of them has been more consistent recently.
We've probably got the same number 1. Notre Dame is also number 2 on my list. They've stayed, last 4 years, they've stayed recruiting in the top 10. Their class this past year was right there at 10. Their 2024 class looks really good at this point. It's very early, obviously, but ranked number 2 currently in the nation. I'm with you on. I think back for Notre Dame is competing at a national level. And I think
they can't win their conference, so
they can't win a conference, right? So I think you should be competing to win 10 or 11 games every year. So this past year they were off that mark, but again, you go back 2018, undefeated, make the playoff. 2020, undefeated, make the playoff. Even this past season, they had a rough start in the first year of a new head coach, but then, they smacked Clemson. That game was a blowout. They beat the heck out of Clemson. And so, they are still number 2 on the list. When you hear number 1, you're not going to be surprised. But Notre Dame, they're competing in, they're doing what they should. I do not think it's realistic for Notre Dame to expect national titles every 4 years. I don't think they're going to get to national prevalence like they were in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
I do think in the new playoff model, they should be getting in every other year. I think that's what Notre Dame should expect, if competing for it every year at least. But
you think every other year with 12 teams?
Because they're not in a conference, so they're automatic. They have a 1 in 6 shot every year because they can't win their conference. So they're competing for
they should be. I guess that's it. I'm getting.
I'm with you. If it's just top 12, 100%, they should every year. I think they should expect to be in
at least 2/3 of the time. Into out one. But
that's where
I agree.
even in a 12-team playoff, I think they're going to be hurt with not being in a conference because you're 10-2 and you're in the SEC, you're in. Like you are in. 10-2 Notre Dame might get left out at that point. We'll see. But Notre Dame, I've also got at 2. Daniel, last year you had Michigan at 2. What's back for Michigan?
I think Michigan is back.
Yes.
I think they have arrived. They've beaten Ohio State 2 years in a row to prove that it was not a fluke last year. And they've done it with 2 different quarterbacks. They've done it with different offensive coordinators. They've done it with, like, this is a sustained approach. It has been a slow build over the course of the year. It was a quick raise of the floor from Harbaugh, but like a steady raise of the ceiling slowly over the years. And he has done a phenomenal job of, I think, being transparent. He has interviewed for NFL head coaching jobs each of the past 2 seasons, and he has been honest about it.
Yeah.
He's been honest. I mean, there's no coaches that I know that would have been straightforward about it. He knew what he did. He came back, just talked about it, and he said, look, I mean, everybody goes through this process. Either someone's going to lie to you or someone's going to tell you the truth. And I think that carries a lot with parents of recruits, with players, with his team. I think they'll go to battle for him. I think he's, a top 5 coach in college football. But that being said, this program, where it is right now, 2 straight conference championships, 2 straight wins over Ohio State, I think it can't be understated. That is the mountaintop for Michigan. If they were to break through this year, it really seemed like they should have beaten TCU to at least they would have gone above what they did last year by only making it to a semifinal and making it to the national championship this year. I think they still lost to Georgia this year as well as they did last year, but if they just couldn't beat TCU. So they're essentially at the plateau of what they did the previous year, but making it to the college football playoff after winning their conference, having a undefeated regular season and beating Ohio State. I mean, that's just, as good as it gets. So they did improve. They lost 1 less game. They, won another, they went undefeated in the regular season. So I'm excited to see what they do next year because I don't think they're going away. And I think they could beat Ohio State again.
That'd be something, wouldn't it?
It would be insane. And I think Ohio State, they keep justifying these losses because, like, last year they justified it by, it was the weather. This year they justified it by, oh, well, we still made the playoff and we played against Georgia better, and they, can rationalize it however they want. They lose a 3rd year in a row. I mean, that's just, I don't know. I'm not predicting it just yet. One team returns their quarterback, the other one doesn't. It's not all about just that, but hey, Michigan is currently back. They're about to graduate from this list with how I feel about them being number 1.
Yeah, Michigan's back. They're number 1. And I think back for Michigan means competing for a Big Ten championship every year. They've won it the last 2. And I don't even think winning it every year. It's unrealistic. Like, you're playing in the same conference as Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be unrealistic if I said Alabama's expectations were to win the SEC every year. Same for Georgia. Like, it's just, you need to compete for that conference championship every year, which Michigan has for the last 2. They've won the conference the last 2. And then I think every 3 to 4 years, you need to be competing for national championships. And if you're competing for the conference championship every year, you're going to set yourself up for that. And they've played for the national championship the last 2 seasons. I think making the playoff, you are competing for a national championship. And so
fair.
Michigan is 100% back. They're number 1 on my list. And I'm with you. They do it again. I'll take them off of the back list because they're like, they are back. I was almost tempted to be like, they're back and they're gone now, but
they beat Ohio State this year. We'll graduate them. That's what we'll do. We're telling you now, everybody, they beat Ohio State this year, regardless of if they win the Big Ten, which they'll win the Big Ten if they beat Ohio State, but they'll graduate from this list.
If anyone wins a national championship on this list, they're also graduated. So, like, automatic.
Right.
I did think it was funny. 2 years ago, I don't have our list from 4 years ago or 3 years ago, whatever, but version 2 of this list, you had Michigan at 6, and so did I. Last year, we both had them at 2. They're now up to number 1. So amazing what a couple of years of beating Ohio State, one of the Big Ten, going to the playoff can do for you on this list.
Just burst through the glass ceiling, man. There's just unlimited potential now.
So you and I both got Michigan at 1, Notre Dame at 2. Let's go to number 3 on your list from last year, which was Penn State. So Penn State, you had at 3. What is back for Penn State, and are they back?
Well, I don't think that they're all the way back. I think that they need to be competing for Big Ten championships. Every year to a certain extent, they need to be within a game of making the Big Ten championship. I think that's fair. I think, if they could, I think they're close, and I do have them at 3 again. They continuously win games year in, year out. They do it with, new players every year where it's not, they don't have just, it's not, Saquon Barkley again. It's not this, it's not that. I think that they're able to, they got, James Franklin, his coaching has, like we said, raised the floor, like how Michigan with Jim Harbaugh has done. I also think, I don't think it could be overstated. They beat an SEC team each of the past 2 seasons, and they did it handily this year and made it look like, okay, yeah, we're in a different league than these guys. And most SEC fans, including myself, went into that game saying, hey, I know Auburn's like a joke in the SEC, but watch out. They're going to go up there and do something. Or actually, this was in Auburn this year. Watch out. They're going to Jordan-Hare. Penn State probably going to lose this game. And it was a game for like the first half, but then Penn State just showed they're just way better. And again, it was Auburn, but a middling team doesn't do that to Auburn, So I was impressed with them this year, not just for that game, for just the totality of the season. But they're still not quite there. So I'm going to keep them at 3. They're clearly behind these first 2 that we've mentioned, but I've got them ahead of some others.
So I think Penn State, I'm with you. So let me back up. I think Penn State, back for Penn State means at least every other year competing for a Big Ten championship, because I don't think their ceiling is as high as Michigan. I don't think they have the resources, location. Like we've talked about job rankings before. They're not a top 10 job like Michigan is. I think they're top 15 probably. They are that 3rd best job in the Big Ten. So again, I don't think the ceiling at Penn State is what it was in the 1980s, right? I have Penn State a little bit lower on my list. I have them at 5, actually. So okay. I think last year I had them at 4 last year. Oh God, the team I had at 3 I'm embarrassed about. I had them at 4 last year. The year before I also had them at 4. I'm dropping them to 5, although they improved this year. But you'll see other teams on this list also improve better. They went 10-2. They lost to Ohio State, Michigan, 2 teams that made the playoff. Like, to me, that's doing almost everything you need to do. Now, this is coming on the back of 2 seasons where, and I've even given the excuse of, I'm excusing the COVID year. They went 4-5. They went 7-6 the year after. They had a bunch of injuries, like bad season. They go 11-2 this year. So even including, like, I know that those years weren't normal, I still can't look past it and just be like, whatever. Now, again, I think the top 5 on this list, top 6 on this list, on my list, all look very, very promising. So I'm not saying this as like I'm a Penn State hater, or I'm selling stock in Penn State this year, or like them moving down on my list has more to say about the other teams that I have above them, not about Penn State. I think they're very business as usual. They're doing what they need to do. They need to beat one of these teams over the next 2 seasons. Like, start getting competitive in these games. Like, go beat an Ohio State, go beat a Michigan, and you'll jump up this list again. So I think Penn State's doing what they need to do. This year will be a big year. Build off of that 10-2 season. Go 10-2 again, and you'll jump up back to 3 probably. So I like where Penn State's at. I have them at 5, though. Daniel, the team you had at 4 last year was Miami. And I had them at 3, which is why I said I was embarrassed. What does back look like for Miami, and are they ranked fourth again?
They are definitely not ranked fourth.
All right.
Back for Miami, I mean, it's been so long. I can't. It's almost like I can't even recall what they should be, um, because I mean, most of my viewing of college football years have just been filled with me hoping and anticipating that they'll have a good team. I grew up watching, NFL teams that were flooded with Miami players, watching the documentary, and just being like, oh wow, this is one of the greatest. I don't think you're ever going to get that again. So I think resetting what back should be for them. I think winning the ACC. I think just being able to win the conference that when they joined, everybody said, "Oh, they're gonna meet Florida State every single year in the conference championship game," which never happened. So I just don't know if I don't know if Miami's up to it. Honestly, I think that I had a lot of confidence in them last year going after Mario Cristobal, really putting it all out on the table for him, bringing in Josh Gaddis and all these guys last year. I felt really confident. That's why I had them at 4. That's why I just was like, oh yeah, they've kicked it up a notch because they realized I still think that there's that blue sky because they still have that guy who cares so much about recruiting in an area that can be recruited and a brand that's still strong. Especially in Miami and with all that talent down there. Um, I just there's a certain point where you have to live up to some sort of expectation, and they actually regressed this year, and had 5 games where a team scored 40 or more points on them. One of those Middle Tennessee State. So I just, to a certain extent, I'm like, I can't. It doesn't compute. So Miami for me, I dropped them to number 7 out of the 8. So Miami is down to number 7.
Back for Miami, to me, I think they are similar to, well, no, I honestly think in the current state of the ACC, you should be competing for ACC championships every year.
If you take yourself seriously as a program, you've got to.
And they've obviously got the resources that they need to be successful. You're in South Florida, where Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State get half their roster. No excuses here. And you're in the ACC. You're not in the SEC. You're not in the Big Ten. I've also got them at 7. This past year was unacceptable. I don't care that it was the first year of a head coach.
Right.
The performance in the field was unacceptable if you're Miami. It was trash. So it was horrible. It was year 1. Cristobal has recruited well. He's got to build on that this year. They got to get better on the offensive and defensive line, which he's recruited well this year. They got 2 highly ranked offensive tackles, so it's very Cristobal. They got to turn that into on-field performance this season. No excuses for Miami. They're at 7 on my list as well. Daniel, USC you had ranked 5th last season. What does back look like for USC, and where are they at?
Yeah, I think back for USC is champions of the Pac-12 at least every other year, which, of course, we're about to move into the Big Ten. So I think they need to be competing for the Big Ten every year. Competing. I'm not saying win it. Competing.
Well, let's stay current state. We'll get into Big Ten version, but like you said,
okay.
Pac-12. They should
Pac-12
win
at a minimum. I mean, this is their last year in it. Might as well win it. Let's end on a bang. That being said, I think the playoff needs to happen, and I mean, their championship program. Jake, you and I grew up where they won, depending upon if you go by the AP or the BCS, they won 3 national championships.
Yeah.
In a short, so that's something that I think that they don't. It's escaping because it's something that Pete Carroll did, and they're trying to replicate that in some way. Lincoln Riley's a good coach. I think that he's kind of in that mold of what Kirby previously did, and then what people are kind of looking at both Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh is like, can they win a championship and kind of break through that mold? I think that that's what people are looking at with Lincoln Riley as well. Very good offensive coach. Can he do enough to make it matter? They've got Caleb Williams this year, but we're talking about a program. As a program, I think they immediately made a step up this year. So I think a lot of these teams actually improved. So me leaving them at 5 to me is an improvement upon last year. It says something that I didn't drop them. I think that they're close because they were within one game of making the playoff. But of course, they didn't make the playoff. They had a Heisman winning quarterback, which is great. But yeah, if you're talking about a program, they need to be in the playoff. I mean, in its current state, I think every 4 years they need to be in the playoff. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And I think every other time that they make the playoff, they need to win the championship. I know that sounds crazy, but that's like once every 8 years. So USC is that good of a program around so many good players, and especially in this NIL era with the transfer portal and a coach like Lincoln Riley who's fun and flashy to play for. I don't think that's too much to ask.
No, so I'm with you. I think back for USC is competing for national championships. And as far as like what you want to define that as, whether it's, like they're on the Michigan tier. This is a top 10 job in college football.
Right.
When you and I ranked the jobs a few years ago, we had USC as seventh best job in the country. You could argue it's higher than that. So this is a job where you need to be competing for national championships. Yearly. Conference championships you should be competing for yearly. So USC, this one of my surprises. I had them as 3.
Okay.
So USC again, similar to Penn State, in that you had a couple bad years leading up to this. Obviously, year one of a new coach, but Lincoln comes in, his quarterback wins the Heisman, and you're a game away from going to the playoff and competing for a national championship, which to me is you are back if you're competing for a national championship. So almost back, because I think Michigan or Notre Dame are back. USC is very close to being back. Therefore, I have them at 3. So I think this is Alex Grinch's last chance to prove that he's actually a good defensive coach. And I think Lincoln Riley knows that. That defense has to be better for them to get to that level. But for USC, again, you win 11 games, you go 11-1, and you are, I see a few plays away. Not really. I know Caleb Williams got hurt. That was a blowout game. But you got to be winning the Pac-12, competing for national championships. They're very close. So I have them at 3. You've got the right head coach. You're using that USC money and transfer portal wisely. Got to get a little bit better in recruiting, but USC is well on their way to being back. Daniel, last year you had Tennessee at 6. So what does back look like for Tennessee, and where do they rank?
I think back for Tennessee was dangerously close to happening this year. I think it's competing for a SEC championship, which now you've got, a juggernaut in Georgia on your side of the division. For years, it seemed like it was just up for grabs. It was, mediocre Florida teams winning it. You had Missouri representing the East a couple of years. There was some years to be had. You had Vanderbilt winning 9 games. Our pets' heads were falling off. It was just crazy. So I don't know if Tennessee in its current state would have dominated that era of SEC East ball. This era, they are fighting to play second fiddle to Georgia and hoping that they can represent whenever Georgia slips up. So I think that back for them is they need to be on Georgia's hip, competing for the SEC East as it stands right now. And then like this year when they played Georgia, they had the opportunity to if they would have won that game against Georgia, they would have been playing potentially for the SEC championship. Obviously, later in the season, they lose to South Carolina, so it kind of, lowers all that. But they beat Alabama this year. I think they have to get some credit for that. Alabama has a down year, but I think we're talking about it more as a down year because Tennessee got them, and it's first time, 15 years? First time Saban has lost to Tennessee. And anyone who's been watching knows that Josh Heupel has had a huge impact on Tennessee, bringing consistency, and it's made it fun for Vols fans to watch. We'll see how he transitions to a new quarterback this year. Hopefully for his sake, if he's able to kind of sustain the success, I think they'll move higher on this list. I think if he sustains what he just did with a new quarterback, it tells me that it's a program thing, not a player thing. And I'll kind of buy in even a little more, but I've got them at 4. They did go up for me. They're still not, in that upper echelon just yet. I think they can. They're a team that can win a championship. They remind me a lot of Auburn, where I think that when the conditions are right, everything can go right and they can win a championship once in a decade or so. But I think for them to be back, just competing for the SEC championship, I think would be plenty. Obviously, you win the SEC, you're going to be competing for a national championship. So
I'm with you on what back means. Like, I think you should be competing in current state for the SEC East if you're Tennessee. Like, that's your ceiling, is like you should have a shot to win the SEC East. And if you win the SEC East, you have a shot to win your conference. So I think Tennessee has a ceiling of they can compete for SEC championships. They can. So I think they need to be. They're well on their way to doing that. They were, a game away this year, potentially from backdooring their way into a playoff.
yeah,
Because you could, they could have argued their only loss was on the road to the number 1 seed, to Georgia. They beat an Alabama team that some people, for some reason, wanted to put in the playoff this year. Got a big win at home. So I've also got Tennessee at 4. Like I said, they're well on their way. They went into Athens, the number 1 team in the country, with essentially playing for the SEC East for that game. That was a conference quarterfinal game, and winner controlled their own destiny. They lost that game, but again, to me, that means they're going into Athens with a chance to win the SEC East, just competing for the SEC East, and that's competing in the SEC. So they're well on their way. Josh Heupel has proven me wrong personally with what he's done at Tennessee, and I've had to eat my words there with how he's done, and I can't wait to see what he does in the future. And like you said, if he does it this year, the different quarterback, and that defense continues to improve, I mean, hey, and they've, I hope for Joe Milton's sake it's Joe Milton, but they've also got that hotshot 5-star freshman, Nico, they paid a lot of money for. So
yeah.
excited to see what Tennessee does here in the next few years. Daniel, 7th. Last year you had Texas. So Texas, what is back for Texas? And is Texas back?
So I think back for Texas is consistently competing for the Big 12 championship, and they have still fallen short of that. And so I do think that they're a little bit away, but I think that this siren song of Texas always catches us, man. They are intriguing as all get out. Quinn Ewers, I mean, just a great quarterback. I think he's going to be a Sunday guy. And then bringing in Arch Manning, I mean, you've just got, no wrong answers in the quarterback room. That's going to go a long way. They've recruited well otherwise, other than just quarterback. So I do think that you've just got talent. They've looking really good from a returning production. I know we're talking about as a program, but if they can this season win the Big 12 in what will be their last season in the Big 12, and then going forward, I think they need to compete for the conference to get to the conference championship every year when they get to the SEC. But as it stands, they need to win the Big 12 this year. Their last year in it, might as well win it. They are a championship caliber program, and I think if somebody were to align them the way that Kirby aligned Georgia or that Saban aligned Alabama, if someone was able to do that at Texas, it's doable to where they could be a juggernaut. Um, it's just, I almost think it's just almost too big to control. And I think that may be the issue. But this isn't a philosophical question. I've got them at 6. So I think that um, it's more about what's on this list. I think that there's a line between 6 and 7 for me, which is Texas at 6, Miami at 7. I think there's a line there where I think Texas, there's more blue sky with Texas than there is with Miami. And I believe in them more just in general. So we'll see. But I've got them at 6. But when we talk about the next and the final team here in just a minute, I kind of feel like these are all. I feel like all of these teams are more back than they were last year as an aggregate, and they've all moved up a little bit, maybe with Miami just dropping down. So
yeah, like everyone still has a like it's not bleak. The future's bright right now.
yes,
Like I completely agree. And I was going to wrap with that point too. So Texas, I've also got at 6. I'm going to be a little more strict with Texas though. Back for Texas is competing for national championships. Period. Like we said, this is we ranked this job number 5, better than any other job on this list as far as access to talent, amount of resources, alumni base, viewership, facility. Like if you're just looking at this job at Texas, you are the University of Texas in Texas. Like you are UT. You're the university. So I think you need to be competing for conference championships every year, competing for national championships every few years. And if you're winning your conference, you're going to put yourself in position to compete for a national championship. So that's why I've got them at 6 with again, that does not mean I am down on Texas because man, that siren song is sounding really, really good here on February 28th. We'll see what I pick with them. Let's get through spring practice before I get too excited about Texas again. Man, that siren song just is, it's beautiful this time of year. But you got to think too, Texas this year, was this year 1 of Sark, year 2?
this is going into year 3, right?
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. Because he was a part of the championship team in 20, and then 21 he took over. Yeah. So they had
They
a losing,
almost beat Alabama last year. They should have beat them.
and that was my point. It was like they went 8-4, but Ewers gets hurt against Alabama. Do they win that game if he goes down or if he stays healthy? Probably.
Yeah.
And then if you win that game, do you go lose to Texas Tech the next week? Like it's amazing what one game can really do to, especially to a locker room.
They might Notre Dame when they lost to Ohio State and then losing to Marshall right afterwards.
So, and there's been a lot of smoke that Ewers was never fully healthy the entire season. So, how does this season look? I mean, obviously, how does the season look if they beat Alabama? Way, way, way different. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. But I have them at 6, so I have them in their proper spot where they need to be on this list based on where their ceiling is, where they can be to be back. But that does not mean I don't believe in Texas. But they're currently 6.
For what it's worth, Texas gets Alabama week 2 this year.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a blast talking about this game.
Yeah.
And the reason should be obvious for most people, but it's Alabama is breaking a new quarterback, and they're not going to have time to piddle paddle around with it because week 2 they play Texas. Texas, the only time that this is like if this was Texas is a challenging team, but Alabama is Alabama, then this is a cute game to talk about, but it's not intriguing. Right now, Alabama, we're not sure if they are Alabama right now. And they're only going to have one tune-up game prior to playing Texas. So Texas seems like they've got more answers than Alabama, which is why that game means so much. I mean, even right now as we sit here at the end of February looking ahead. I can't wait for that game. So Texas has a real opportunity this year to make some hay, especially their last year, the Big 12, and they get to play Alabama, and then future years they're going to play Alabama at least every other year. So this is kind of a way for them to kind of get ahead of the curve and maybe beat them before they're part of the conference. So very intriguing.
Very intriguing. What's not very intriguing is number 8 on your list last year. Well, they weren't intriguing this past season. Nebraska. And based on all the numbers you've given so far, they're still 8 on your list, and they're 8 on my list. But so a question, though, is what does back for Nebraska actually look like? And I think you and I are both, like you said, with every team on this list, there's some blue sky here at Nebraska.
Yeah, and I mean, it's your boy, Matt Rule, is there to get this to get this jump started. But I think that they've also got a ton of great commits and some good transfers and everything like this. I'm optimistic about what they can do this season. Back for them is tough because you're talking about 95-96, one of the greatest runs of all time. I know Nebraska fans look at that and say that's what we should be, but I'm almost just like look to before you brought in Scott Frost and what had been going on, where you were at least a perennial 8 to 10 win team every single year. I think they need to reach. I think they need to be back. They need to win 10 games. For me,
every year.
Well,
or they need to get to that point.
I think they need to reach that threshold one time to a certain extent. But if they could reach the stage where they're winning 10 games, let's say consistently every 3 or 4 years, like they are winning 10 games. They don't have to win 12. They don't have to win 11. I think that's back. I know that. I think it's just because it's a proud program. I think it's a good job, and I have a lot of expectations for them, but I'm not even putting on any, hey, they have to win conference. I mean, it's a tough conference. I'm not even saying they have to make the playoff. I'm saying, look, you should be able to scrounge together for them to be back. I'm not saying for them to be improved and better and all these kinds of things. I think that those things are, 8 wins a year and you can be happy and do those kinds of things. But no. Back 10 wins a year. I mean, majority of the seasons. 3 out of 4 years, have a dip, win 8 games, back to 10 the next year.
Yeah, I think back is averaging 9.5 wins a season. So I'm with you in that, like, that is reasonable for Nebraska. And if you're a Nebraska fan, that's not fun to be like, that's our expectations, 9.5 wins a season. Like, the reality is the glory days are the glory days for a reason, because you don't always get back there. But Elliott says a lot. Take the check, take the losses. That's what they did when they joined the Big Ten, was take the big paycheck and start taking the losses. A lot more recently. They're still 8 on my list, but that doesn't mean that this time next year, Miami hasn't improved. Texas does Texas things, and Nebraska goes 9-3 and like wins the Big Ten West, because I do think that's the effect Matt Rule can have maybe in year 1, but years 2 and 3, I expect Matt Rule to do good things in Nebraska, but currently they are number 8. So they haven't moved.
And they're great. I mean, like, they're a team. There's a reason they're on this list, because this is a list of, teams that are, they've done this before. They're has-beens. They're not never wases. They're has-beens. So they could be something great. I agree. I don't think they'll ever get to that threshold of maybe the greatest teams ever. But look, there's a path to national championships there. There's a path to Big Ten championships there. They are few and far between as far as being consistent, just because you got some giants in your conference. But, I mean, the fact that they haven't won the Big Ten West, it's just they should have done that by now.
Yeah. And, they played for a Big Ten championship back when it was like Legends and Leaders, like that first 2012, that first year they played for it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Against Wisconsin. So again, it was the weird alignment. But that was 11 years ago. So they should have won the Big Ten West by now for sure. But that is Nebraska.
Was that Russell Wilson?
Yeah.
At Wisconsin?
I don't know. That sounds about that time.
Because then they went to they were number 4 in the country, and they're one of those teams that talked about, we would have been in the playoff. I think that was the Russell Wilson year, because then he went pro and then did his stuff in Seattle. Anyway,
that's right. Anyway, next week we will be talking about the NFL Combine. So again, one of the 2 crossover episodes we'll have with the NFL, this and the draft, because these are our players, man. So we'll talk about who stuck out at the Combine, some of our favorite college athletes. We'll talk about that next week here on the Extra Point. Be sure to like the video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on social at the Extra Point Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can follow him on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of the Extra Point. He is Daniel. I am Jacob.